Welcome back again. We're still joined with you at the Daily Debate. I'm very much delighted, and I'd like to welcome once again in the studio this evening Dr. Khaled Abu Zeid, Regional Water Resources Director at Sidari. Thank you once again for coming in. Doctor, as you've seen in the report, Foreign Minister Sameh Shukri had a very important tour last week. Specific countries in Africa were visited by Minister Shukri, delivering a message from President Sisi regarding the GERD file. Tell us about how you preview this visit in terms of its significance and what does it imply?
Well, it was a very important step informing African leaders about the Egyptian stance with respect to the GERD, the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. He visited important countries from several regions in Africa. Of course, with the current presidency of the African Union, Congo, and other countries as well from North Africa, West Africa, South, and East. It is very important to inform African leaders of the African countries to start with about the Egyptian standpoint regarding the recent announcement by Ethiopia that it will start the second stage of the filling of the dam, and this step is supposed to have been done after the countries reach an agreement on the rules and regulations for the filling and for the operation. This is what the Declaration of Principles on the Renaissance Dam stated. The three countries have signed the Declaration of Principles in 2015.
Yes.
And there are articles there that clearly stated that the countries have to agree on the rules and procedures of the first filling and the operation of the dam, and this means that it should, of course, be reached. This agreement should be reached before Ethiopia starts filling the dam, and this filling of the dam has several stages. It violated this declaration by doing the first stage of the filling last year, filling about 4.9 billion cubic meters of water in the dam. And it announced that it's going to fill the second stage, which is about 13.5 billion cubic meters. And that's also going to be a violation if an agreement on these rules and procedures for not just the filling, but also the operation, the long-term operation of the dam, is reached before the filling. It's really alarming that Ethiopia would do that for the second time without reaching an agreement. There has been a lot of procrastination in the negotiations by the Ethiopian side, unfortunately, that delayed reaching an agreement. In fact, there are some statements by Ethiopian officials saying that they do not intend to sign a binding agreement.
All right.
And this defeats the purpose of the whole negotiations.
Yes, you've mentioned a number of crucial points, Dr. Khaled, and let me start by discussing the Declaration of Principles agreement that was signed back in 2015. And obviously it has principles that the three countries have agreed on, Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia. And of course Egypt and Sudan have equal concerns about the filling and the operation of the dam. Now, what happened is that Ethiopia had violated that the first time. Nothing really was tangibly and concretely on the ground done concerning that. Many meetings have been held during the past period trying to bring all parties together. It seems to be that the latest one that took place in Kinshasa was a complete failure. Moreover, the refusal of Ethiopia for a quartet and for mediators to be included to sort of find a solution to that. And as you said, perhaps it's starting already or will very shortly do the second filling. And that's a bigger and greater violation according to your perspective of the filling amount of cubic meters. What is the legal situation now with this agreement that was signed by Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan in 2015?
Well, this is the document that is binding the three countries regarding the dam. The three countries have agreed by signing on this Declaration of Principles agreement that they would reach an agreement on the rules and procedures of filling and operation of the dam. There are also articles related to resorting to a mediator if there are some challenges in reaching an agreement. They could agree on a mediator. And the African Union has been playing that role. The United States have been playing that role. In fact, the United States has hosted several meetings of the three countries, and they drafted an agreement actually for the operation and the filling of the dam based on what was agreed in the discussions. And Egypt signed or initialed the agreement, but Ethiopia left the meeting and did not attend the final meeting where they were supposed to have agreed during that meeting.
Yeah, that's why I specifically said that they have broken down all the rules legally, which means that an action should be taken. Specifically now that Foreign Minister Shukri had returned this file to the United Nations.
Yes.
What, in your perspective, will be happening from the legal perspective first before we dive into the technical and scientific perspective of this?
Well, Egypt has also sent the UN Security Council and the United Nations to the United Nations Secretary General a letter explaining the whole situation. This is the second letter that Egypt sends to the United Nations. Sudan also has sent a letter explaining this whole situation.
A meeting was held a couple of months ago with the United Nations, but it didn't seem to have anything fruitful coming out of it concerning the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam.
Yeah, this maybe was.
It was
just
an online virtual meeting, and it didn't seem to have resulted into anything.
No,
as well.
But of course, each country has explained their standpoint, and it kind of set the baseline for what each country perspectives are regarding the dam. Of course, there were some misinformation by some countries on the situation. Ethiopia has...
What kind of misinformation, Doctor, would happen for a Nile that belongs to everybody and being cut off to the rest of the countries?
Misinformation like...
You know, mankind lives on water, so you're basically killing them.
Yes.
What kind of misinformation do they have about this perspective? Unless they geographically don't understand where the Nile falls, that's a different story.
Exactly, and giving some wrong information like Egypt and Sudan are using the lion's share of the Nile and all the waters of the Nile. That's completely wrong.
That's specifically why they have to go back and study geography, see where Egypt and Sudan lies at the end of the line.
Yes, and make an assessment of how much water is in the river basin, in the Nile basin, because the Nile basin receives about 1,660 billion cubic meters per year of rainfall. Ethiopia itself receives about 450 billion cubic meters per year of rainfall within the basin only. But outside the basin and in other basins in Ethiopia, as a whole, they receive about more than 960 billion cubic meters per year on average.
Well, this is
Where
interesting.
does this all
exactly. Well, let's move here to this stage now. Now, there's no problems, definitely, with the fact that it's completely Ethiopia's right to develop itself and to generate electricity, whatever it needs to do with the water to make its economy better. But the fact is there should be rules that regulate that. And as you've correctly said, the rules will basically said, well, fill it when there's drought, or how it's going to be filled when there's between the drought or the dry years. How are you going to stop on that? Why is it difficult for Ethiopia to understand that when the fact is that there's a scarcity of water coming from God straight from up there, and there's no need for you to block out water that is basically serving more than 100 million population? Where is the problem?
Yes, exactly. It's more of a political stand. It's not technical, because technically it is feasible with certain limitations, of course, to generate hydropower. But in the meantime, do not cause at least significant harm to the downstream countries. And that's why the rules of operation and filling is very important to reach, because not every year is like the other. Sometimes the Nile flood is high, and sometimes it's low. And when it's low, and there are successive years that are low in flood, this is when the problem comes, because if the incoming flows are less than how much Sudan and Egypt is using, then it has to draw from its storage, and to do that, if there are successive years, then the highest one dam lake would be depleted, and that's when Ethiopia should be releasing water and not storing it at high levels over there. In addition, that operating the dam in Ethiopia at high levels will cause losses in evaporation, losses in seepage, because the bigger the storage in Ethiopia, in the Ethiopian dam, the bigger the losses are in evaporation and in seepage. And this losses will be cut from the flows that goes downstream, or that used to go downstream to Sudan and Egypt. And Egypt and Sudan are willing to bear this little bit of an impact, but in the same time they have to have guarantees that certain flows will be released during these droughts, especially because this is where the critical time is. And the fact even that Ethiopia has selected the size of the dam to be 74 billion.
Which is exactly what we were going to talk about next. I mean, talk about the dimensions of I mean, you could actually serve the entire African state, a continent over this size. That's actually one of the biggest, if not the biggest, dam that was ever built. And from here we want to talk about people who are actually financing this.
And why 74?
I don't understand. The number seems to be a very special number to whoever financed it.
If you add Egypt's share, 55.5, to Sudan's share, which is 18.5 billion cubic meters per year, that gives you 74. So this gives an indication that that big size of the dam is a political decision. It's not a technical decision. They could generate the same amount of power with a smaller dam.
Well, actually, they seem to have a bigger plan, which is to sell water. So unless they want to cut it off to these two countries to sell them off the water, which is their ultimate right, that's a different story. But I'm glad that you mentioned the political stance here, and maybe we need to talk about this a little bit before we talk more about the scientific dimensions of whether the size and the challenges that are going to be eventually facing the dam if it does continue being operated in this unscientific manner. The political stance. I know we do understand, and the President spoke very clearly about this, maybe unlike all the previous years and all the talks that we hear here and there and the speculations, but he spoke very clearly that this is a red line and that this is a national security issue, and that, you know, don't push us actually to go. I mean, we would respect, and we would always respect going to the legal lines and preserving the rights of each country, but it would never be on the account of our rights and our citizens' rights. The political sort of battle that is undergoing here, what is that suggesting? Because it seems to be that Ethiopia is not being alone here. I mean, definitely it's not alone, speaking with all this confidence. What are we seeing here? A greater picture of, I mean, we've seen, why I'm saying that as well, is that we've seen Egypt being supported by Moscow recently. We've been seeing Egypt being supported by the Arab region. We're seeing Egypt being supported by the rest of the African continent. And it's very odd that with all this support and the weight that Egypt has reached today, that Ethiopia is still very rigid when it comes to its political stance towards the filling of this dam. How do you preview this picture?
Well, unfortunately, Ethiopia is still under the old thinking of Egypt and Sudan signing an agreement together on the shares of waters from the Nile, which actually represents only 4% of the whole amount of water.
And it was signed at a time where Egypt's population was very irrelevant to the
exactly.
population outcasts
And
today.
at a time when Egypt was actually using this water, and part of it was going to the Mediterranean Sea, when Egypt and Sudan decided to build the High Aswan Dam and to divide the waters that used to go to the Mediterranean Sea without any usage. And this dam actually made available about 22 billion cubic meters of water, where this 22 billion cubic meters of water were divided by the range of 14 billion cubic meters to Sudan, actually, and 7 to Egypt. 14 and a half and 7 and a half to Egypt. And that made the total shares of what these two countries were using actually at that time to be 55.5 to Egypt and 18 and a half to Sudan. And Egypt at that time, Sudan, Ethiopia at that time didn't like Sudan and Egypt signing an agreement all by themselves, thinking that they are using all the waters of the Nile, which is not true. As I mentioned, the Nile River Basin receives 1,660 billion cubic meters of water. If you look at the water that is utilized in Ethiopia right now by the rain-fed agriculture in the basin and by the grazing lands, Ethiopia has the highest population of livestock in Africa. The groundwater recharge that's there that you could be using, all the lakes that are there in Ethiopia, all this is water that Ethiopia is utilizing one way or another, generating hydropower, feeding their population out of rain-fed agriculture, meat out of their livestock, and exporting livestock. Ethiopia is the larger exporter of coffee and in Africa and all that. So this wrong and misconception that Egypt is using all the waters and that they want to have a share out of this water that Egypt and Sudan is using, that's the wrong misconception that is leading Ethiopia into the wrong direction. They should be looking at the bigger pie, which is the water in the basin as a whole, not the water in the river that goes and is utilized by other countries. Mm-hmm. The water in the river could be used for hydropower, but with certain regulations and rules so that it doesn't impact the countries downstream. But they should be looking at the bigger picture, the bigger pie, so that they could be actually respecting what they are actually using out of other forms of water. We call it green water and blue water. Egypt and Sudan depend more on the blue water, which is the water in the river. But Ethiopia, because it's upstream, it depends more on the green water in the basin, which is the rainwater that contributes to the green cover directly, like rain-fed agriculture and grazing land and forests that are there, and they are being also utilized for other reasons as well. So there should be a respect for all forms of water within the basin. They should be looking and sharing the green and blue water together, not leaving out the green water that they are only benefiting from and fighting over the blue water that goes downstream.
Yeah, speaking of regulation and how this process that you've been correctly speaking about now, for it to be actually put on roundtable discussion and reach to a serious agreement where all parties would be very committed to, this would require organizations outside of this three-party circle to be able to mediate. So we're talking about the African Union, which is the most closer one because it's within the African continent, responsible for all the issues of the African continent, and we have the United Nations. So what, in your perspective, is most likely to be the best case scenario and the worst case scenario concerning the GERD issue right now?
Yeah, speaking of the GERD specifically, which is our focus right now, it's not the water resources at large in the basin. The African Union has a role, of course, and any other institution or organization or country that could help is welcomed. We see Sudan have suggested 4 entities to help, being the African Union, the United Nations, the United States, and the European Union. And Egypt has welcomed the suggestion as well. Unfortunately, Ethiopia didn't support that process or approach. But definitely they could have a role to play in this and to help and assist. We've seen the United States drafting an agreement that could be a start for the binding agreement in the end. But there has to be a political will. There has to be a political will that an agreement need to be reached and need to be binding and need to be a legal agreement where every country is bound by. We cannot deal with such a huge project, such a huge dam that affects the lives of more than 150 million people downstream by verbal statements and not by written agreements that every country should be bound by.
Worst case scenario is that, as Ethiopia has been saying in its statements, that it will be proceeding with the filling of the second stage by as soon as June or July, which is, we're talking about a month or so. What's going to happen in this regard from a technical perspective in terms of the effect that Egypt would have concerning the water levels?
Yes, in fact, the second stage of the filling is, as I mentioned, is about 13.5 billion cubic meters.
And how long does this filling process take?
And they want to fill it in about 2 months.
2 months?
Yeah, the flood starts in July. That's where most of the water starts coming into the Blue Nile. July, August, and then September, and it extends into October a little bit. And that's the peak for the flood, those 4 months, July and August being the most. So they wanted to fill this 13.5 in those first 2 months. And that's part of the problem, is that these rules, the timing, how much and when is going to be filled, this is the type of rules and regulations that have to be agreed between the countries.
Is it the timing or the amount, Doctor? Because the timing is a drought, but what about the amount?
The timing is, it's not a drought, but it could be a drought year too. That's the problem. We don't know the next flood, how
When
much
it's going
is
to
it
take
going,
time.
how big is it going to be? Is it going to be a high flood year or a low flood year? If it's a low flood year, there will be a problem. And these rules and regulations would say that in case of a low flow, a low flood year, what would happen in the filling? How would the filling be? How much and when? If it's a high flood, what should be done? If it's more than one successive years of flood after one another, and this brings us to the next stages of the filling, because there is also a third stage and a fourth stage and a fifth stage of
Allow
filling.
me to pause you there, please. Pardon me. But when you said that the 3 parties need to technically and scientifically understand how much and how long and whether this is going to be a year full of drought or not. So in this regard, I mean, I don't know, but maybe you can correct me. I'm not an expert in this. But, I mean, wouldn't Ethiopia be equally facing challenges and problems as Egypt and Sudan if there is no other floods or other droughts? I mean, wouldn't that affect them as well? Because they're busy filling, so they can't really make use of this water until they fill it. Is that correct?
Yeah, they can.
I mean, they're not benefiting from this at the end of the day unless it's completely failed, or failed at least to the level because of its capacity that would require them to stop making use of this water. So they're being affected as well, and even they're affected more because they're much more poorer economically than Egypt, for instance.
No, but they are upstream. We're talking here about water for the hydropower generation, not food, not drinking purposes or
Yes.
agriculture.
Yes, it's electricity.
It is electricity for that particular case that we're talking about. But because Ethiopia is depending on its food and drinking purposes from upstream, rain-fed agriculture, as I mentioned,
So they're
groundwater,
not on the
lakes.
contrary. They know what they're doing. They're not being affected.
They won't be affected by that, but they would be affecting
Other
the countries
countries.
downstream. And that's why the amount of water that's being stored and the timing, because for Sudan, especially because it's the most downstream
Yes.
country, and it does not have enough storage to use from, it would be affected the most. But Egypt would also be affected if there are more than one drought year after one another. It wouldn't have any storage to use water from, and then it would be affected. That's why the long-term operation rules
Will be
are very important. Now they have to raise the middle part of the dam in order to allow themselves to fill that amount of water, and they need to raise the dam about 30 meters. They need to pour reinforced concrete in the volume of about 450,000 cubic meters of reinforced concrete from now until beginning of July.
Isn't that going to even affect the whole dam structure in the first place? I mean, I believe it's built on a land that is not fit for this size in the first place.
But even if we don't consider that part, but considering
because that's
concrete,
again, I mean, we do want our water, but we don't want to be over flooded by GERD's water.
Exactly.
And then Sudan will definitely have a problem with that.
Exactly.
Yes. So we'll be talking about more with concerning Egypt and Egypt internally, and the government and all the different ministries are working very hard on trying to work on the water irrigation using new technology on that, and also raising awareness to the people and the citizens in general on how to be able to use or consume the water very precisely. So allows Dr. Khaled to go to this second report, and we'll be right back.
Speaking at a ceremony held on the occasion of launching the National Programme for Structural Reforms, Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli said that the Egyptian state is working on all fronts to deal with the issue of the GERD. The Prime Minister stated that the state carries out various mega-projects to make use of every drop of water, adding that Egypt is on top of the countries that highly preserve and maximize water utilization. The Premier affirmed that the state carried out development projects as part of its efforts to ensure every drop of water is preserved, including the construction of more seawater desalination plants. Other measures to preserve water includes the use of triple treatment of agricultural and industrial wastewater after it undergoes treatment in accordance with the internationally recognized norms. Worth mentioning that the two downstream countries, Egypt and Sudan, have warned that filling the dam without a binding agreement poses threats to their people and water rights. Egypt and Sudan seek an international mediation and engagement to ensure a deal on the filling and operation of the dam is reached before the second filling phase.
Welcome back again. You're still watching us at our episode here at the Daily Debate. Dr. Khaled Abu Zeid, Regional Water Resources Director at Zeid, is still with us. Dr. Khaled, as we've seen in this report, let's talk more about the Prime Minister, who had said and stated clearly that the state is carrying out various mega projects to make use of every drop of water, of course, adding that Egypt is on the top of the countries who are highly preserving and maximizing their water resources. What are the efforts that have been or are being currently done internally by Egypt concerning the water resources?
Yes, that's true. I mean, Egypt is one of the most efficient countries in the overall use efficiency of the water, because water is recycled and reused more than once. And the water that leaves the system is actually the water that is being used several times, and that is full of salts, and this is important for agriculture to leach the salts and get rid of the salts. So we see that Egypt, and this is not because of the dam or because of the Ethiopian dam, but it's because of the increasing
Part of the plan,
demand,
yes.
and the increasing population, and the need to provide water resources for the population of Egypt and for the growth and development. For instance, if we look at the domestic water sector, the domestic water sector, all the coastal cities in Egypt now are going to be dependent on desalination. And there are already existing desalination for 20 years. The tourism sector, for instance, that's in South Sinai, in Hurghada, in the Red Sea, governorates, all of these cities have been using desalination water for years, for more than 20 years now. The northern coast on the Mediterranean has been using desalination, but now there is also an expansion in the desalination plants.
Especially with the new Alamein city, and been very working hard in this regard, yes.
And there are decrees and rules now that all coastal cities will depend on desalinated water. The other thing is the recycling of agriculture drainage. Agriculture drainage is used more than once. There are more than 9 billion cubic meters of agriculture drainage water that is being recycled and reused more than once. And this has been also for several years going on. There are treated wastewater, for using treated wastewater in agriculture. Egypt has a code for reuse that has 4 levels of treated wastewater, and each level of treated wastewater has certain specific crops that could be cultivated using these level of treatment. And on top of that, recently, for the last 5 years, there has been mega projects. The president has inaugurated one, and maybe the second one is going to be done soon, and he also announced a third one, and this is the treatment of a mixed agriculture drainage with municipal wastewater. And the treatment of those 2 types of drainage and wastewater, and directing these type of water to the agriculture lands that has depleted groundwater, because some of the groundwater aquifers have been depleted. So this can compensate for these agriculture areas that are suffering from depleted groundwater. They cannot, all this investment in this agriculture has been affected. So they need water, and there is no water. So this treated wastewater and treated agriculture drainage could be directed to this water. There are new areas of agriculture land that will also utilize this treated water from these mega projects. There is the Mahsama mega project, there is Bahr al-Baqar mega project, and recently there is the Hammam mega project for treatment. So Egypt is working towards utilizing every drop of water, even the salty wastewater and drainage water that used to go to the sea. Egypt will be using it. So the little bit of Nile water that goes to Egypt is being utilized more than once. So if it is affected, all these projects are going to be affected as well.
Maybe here I also want to concentrate more with you, because after you've correctly explained very specifically about where this water is going, how is it being utilized and recycled in other terms. But we're talking about the effort and part of the president's plan in using technology and modern ways for water irrigation, whether they are for new projects or for renovating the old ones. And from here we're talking about a level of awareness that has been changed, because for years, and even way before GERD started, there's always been a water scarcity because there's no proper administration and the proper use of technology to be able to put this water in their direct positions. We're seeing that being very different during the past 3-4 years. And how is that being reflected on the economy of Egypt in return? And maybe here I need to put a little bit in the issue of the corona, for instance, and the pandemic when the close down happened last year, and Egypt was not affected at all because there was a scarcity of agricultural products and livestock, and everything was perfectly fine, unlike other countries that were depending to a very large percent on the imports, for instance. So how is this restructuring and reformation of the water resources handling issue being affected positively on or reflected positively on the economy?
Well, thank you for reminding me. The other important national projects that are going on are the canal lining to reduce the losses from the canals, and also the modernization of irrigation systems that are taking place to use modern irrigation rather than surface irrigation.
And the President spoke about that a couple of days ago as well.
Yes, indeed. However, this doesn't mean that Egypt was wasting the water before then. It was using the water by recycling this seepage to the groundwater. Groundwater was pumped and repumped and reused. By these waters that goes to the drains, it was recycled and reused. But this modernization of irrigation is going to improve on the quality of water that goes to it. Of course, it will save a little bit of water, but the main thing is that it will provide a better quality for irrigation rather than recycling and reusing agriculture drainage. But all this contributes to a more efficient agriculture, more effective production of agriculture products that might reduce a little bit the need for imports. Why would I say that? Because if you look at Egypt's imports of food, and this reflects on Egypt's water scarcity, because if Egypt has enough water, it could have been self-sufficient in every food element and food product. But because of the water scarcity that the per capita share of water in Egypt is less than the 500 cubic meters per person per year. That's less than the international
standard
severe water scarcity conditions. Severe water scarcity conditions, and Egypt is almost there now. It's beyond the water scarcity limit, which is 1,000 cubic meters per capita per year. But now it even went under the severe water scarcity limit.
It was very ironically believed that people, internationally might not be very much aware of how much water the Aswan Dam is being, unless they feel that, we're being very much saved with water. You're just saying right now that we are severely below the line.
And that's reflected in the amount of food that Egypt imports. Egypt imports what we call virtual water, embedded in the food that it imports, in the neighborhood of about 48 billion cubic meters per year.
That's huge.
So this means it's almost equal to Egypt's share of 55.5 billion cubic meters per year. So this means that if Egypt would to be self-sufficient, it has to have another share of Nile waters.
And that's without filling the second stage of the dam yet.
Without operating, without the losses that will be experienced from evaporation and seepage from the dam and all that. So, of course, this optimization and efficiency in not only in water use but also agriculture production and increasing the productivity of agriculture in Egypt is going to help a little bit in closing the gap of food security. But in the meantime, we have to know that the population is increasing and we have to provide more food as well and more water for the country. So we don't have the luxury of losing any bit of water from the Nile. In fact, the countries should sit together, not just Ethiopia and Sudan and Egypt, but also the other Nile countries, to work on a different other type of project which looks at making use of the losses from the whole system. That there are projects to increase the yield of the Nile by utilizing the losses in the upper Nile swamps and to make use of this water so that all the countries can benefit. And this is another area of cooperation that should be there. On one hand, between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia in the eastern Nile, but on the other hand, between Egypt and the other countries in the equatorial lakes. As well.
We just have 3 minutes, Rhonda, sir, before unfortunately our episode is almost over. So I would like to finally ask you one question, Dr. Khaled. And what if Ethiopia goes ahead unilaterally filling the dam on the second phase? What is going to be the scenario diplomatically? What can Egypt still do to be able to find a peaceful agreement reached between the three parties?
Well, there's a lot that Egypt can do, of course, but I wouldn't hope that we go down this road because I hope that the countries would reach an agreement. We don't want to be having a conflict and go to the Security Council or go to the UN and complain or ask for a court for arbitration between the countries on a conflict, because the countries are neighbors, and there will be long relationships between the three countries, and the neighborhood between the three countries should really be the good neighborhood should be an objective. So I really would hope that Ethiopia would think it over again and realize that they are actually utilizing currently a lot of water from the Nile River basin, and there is a bigger potential that could be looked at and utilized. And we look at additional resources and cooperate between the three countries over these additional resources, rather than fighting over currently utilized water between the countries. And we really should not be affecting other countries and give them a level of confidence by reaching a binding agreement on.
And on the Arab level, we see support being echoed out by the UAE, where we've seen the official being on an official visit to President Sisi a couple of days ago, again speaking on good, in particular during their meetings. We've seen Tunisia and Libya, part of the African continent, also Arab countries supporting Gulf region as well. How can that be pressuring and help in diplomatically reaching an agreement between the three parties again?
Yeah, well, Egypt's case and Sudan is a fair case. So, I mean, every country you talk to is supporting the fairness and is supporting Egypt and Sudan's standpoint. So we hope really that Ethiopia would get back to the negotiations and reach an agreement.
Very well. Dr. Khaled Abu Zeid, Regional Water Resources Director of Sudari, thank you very much for joining me here on the Daily Debate. That brings us to the end of our episode of the Daily Debate this evening. I'm Yasmin Bakir signing off. Thank you for watching.